Hello, everybody. Thanks again for visiting my YouTube channel. This is the place where we discuss the Lord's Recovery Movement of Witness Lee, also known as the local church movement. I'm going to put up a list of names here, people, celebrities you probably recognize, and ask you, what do all these women have in common? No, it's not that they were pursued by Philip Lee. Shame on you for thinking that. They might have been if the cult they had grown up in was the Lord's Recovery, but they weren't. Each of these women was raised in some sort of controlling, excessive, extreme religious group. Glenn Close was in something called moral rearmament. Wynonna and Runner was in a commune called Rainbow. The Arquette family was in something called Subud. Lisa Marie Presley was in Scientology, and Rose McGowan was in the Children of God. And I display this just to show you how common it is for people to be raised in controlling, abusive, high control, exploitive religious groups, aka cults. I think the important thing to realize, and I'm directing this at everybody, but also at the second generation church kids, is to realize this is a widespread experience, a widespread phenomenon. If you grew up in the Lord's Recovery and you think nobody understands you, I think we all need to have our concept rearranged and realize that a lot of people go through this and a lot of people have to deal with it. It's really more about people exploiting people than it is about religion or anything else. And unfortunately, people exploit our need to believe in something and use us as a means to an end. So if you grew up in the Lord's Recovery, realize that there are a lot of people in the world that have grown up in abusive religious groups. I've been asked to say something specific to the second generation people, and in my research so far, I've seen two things that put them at a disadvantage. One is they don't have any other point of reference than their experience. People that come into the Lord's Recovery have their former life to fall back on, whereas church kids don't. It's all they know. So they have to create a whole new life for themselves. And that's difficult, but it's doable. The other thing is they often do not have the skills and the growth in certain areas that are necessary and fundamental and other people take for granted. Things about relationships, trust, self-reliance, the ability to engage in critical thought. And these kinds of skills that come in an upbringing where you are respected as an individual and your opinion is respected and you're allowed to grow and develop and form relationships and learn how to interact socially in a healthier way. But they can be learned. And it just takes time. And there's going to be a learning curve to do it, but it can be done. One thing I would suggest is just realize that, as I said, this is a lot more common experience than probably a lot of us knew. A lot of people grow up in these kind of groups. I read something Rick Ross said. He's a cult group expert, and he said that he learns about a new cult every day. They just keep popping up, okay? Because basically what they are is somebody realizing he can use people's need to believe in something as a way to exploit them. It just requires somebody who's cynical enough to want to use that to get ahead. Or they're just crazy enough to think they really are some kind of special prophet. But as you start reading about these groups, you realize they're just like certain kinds of musical genres. All the songs kind of sound the same. It's just the details that are a little bit different. If you are a second generation person, realize that you can just Google growing up in a cult and you will find story after story of people relating their feelings, how they dealt with it, what they did, how it affected them, and how they grew afterwards and reconciled things. And people survive. We were built to survive. And so realize I am no kind of expert and I don't want to pretend to be an expert. But like I said, if you're a second generation person, realize I think there's two things, like I said. One is you don't have a former life to fall back on. You're going to have to create a new life. And the second thing is you may not have developed certain skills that you need to focus on. I've already talked about trusting the inner voice, learning to think critically, and learning to trust and not be afraid to reason. Also realizing it's your choice. And there are other things to do, like learning how to set up boundaries, let people in your life, making friends and forming relationships. And really it comes down to loving yourself the way God loves you. That might sound a little strange, but God's love for us is totally healthy. And He wants us to like ourselves. He wants us to have confidence in the person He created, which is you, to have respect for yourself so that, number one, you don't turn over control of your life to somebody else. And number two, you still can allow people in your life that you want to share your life with. And that's a beautiful thing when you can have that confidence and have that balance to do that. You have enough confidence in yourself to make your own decisions, but you also have enough confidence to allow people in and make yourself a little vulnerable. And that's something you have to learn how to do. But you don't have to go through life in a state of fear or trepidation or worry that somebody is going to hurt you, although that's probably a little bit hard to swallow given the fact that I've talked about these exploitive groups. But as long as you have the knowledge to realize that, and this is what gets taken away from these people, is realization that they have autonomy. And that's what these groups do. They start claiming that they know better than you what you should do with your life. And we should be grateful to people that are wise enough to share real wisdom with us and help us, but just because somebody says, I know this, doesn't mean they know anything. It's up to you to discern what they're saying and figure it out and decide whether you want to give yourself to that or you want to tell them to take a hike. And you got the right to do either. God gives us the right to make our own decisions. Even if we make wrong decisions, He still gives us that right. The Lord's Recovery's whole view of authority is completely wrong-headed. It's not the way God does things. Their whole view of how God fulfills His purpose is wrong. He doesn't do it by a hierarchy of authority, and that's the way they view it. He does it by relationships. That's what the Trinity is about, is relationships, which are voluntary. And love is voluntary. The thing you have to realize about love is, if you center your life in a life of love, love is totally voluntary. Love is empowering because it allows you to care about somebody, and yet it's a totally voluntary act. If you choose, let's say, to go to the extreme and sacrifice your life for somebody, you didn't do that because you had to. You did it because you wanted to, because you truly wanted to. And Paul said, love never fails. What does that mean? That means if you truly love somebody the way God loves people, you're going to make the right decisions about your relationship with that person. I'm not talking about some crazy obsession or infatuation with somebody. I'm talking about genuine kind of love that God has, where He is willing to stick His neck out for other people because He cares about them. And yet, God remains God. And so when we get into relationships, they can be very empowering because we have the confidence, or can have the confidence, to have complete control of our life, and yet we are willing to open ourselves up and let people in that we trust and that we like and love and want to be a part of our lives. And we also have the right to draw boundaries with other people. And I'm not talking about cliques, and I'm not talking about favoritism. I'm talking about there are people that just don't earn our trust. And we don't have to let those people in those special places where we let the people that we truly care about and truly trust in. And so as you're going forward, realize that there's a lot of stories from a lot of people who are in a lot of different groups out there. Read those stories. Go to those websites. Read their stories. Find out how similar it was. You'll be stunned to realize the similarity. So you can get help from that. And it should also help you to realize we weren't really all that special. What happened in the Lord's Recovery, all these groups think they're it. Just read about the Fleur Brown's story about growing up in the Worldwide Church of God. It's on the internet. All you got to do is Google Fleur Brown cult, and you will find her story. It's strikingly similar to the story of the Lord's Recovery. And so this is common. So the idea, oh my gosh, I was in God's move, and now I'm not, and I'm going to be in outer darkness because I left. This is what all these people are afraid of. They're all afraid that they left the true move and now they're doomed. That's what got put in their heads because somebody wanted to exploit them. These groups want to exploit you. They use people as a means to an end for their goals. They're not doing it for you, they're doing it for them. Okay? It's a way of using people to get something, whether it's power or sex or money. Those are the big three usually. But sometimes power is a kind of living out of a fantasy of being some sort of messiah or something, or some sort of great leader that's going to save the world. Just take it a day at a time. Try to develop the life skills. Take control of your life again. Have self-respect. Realize that God loves you and cares about you and wants good things for you. Gain that confidence and control of your life again. And then just learn that you can love people, and love is empowering because it allows you to do things that are good in a voluntary way because you want to, not because somebody told you to. I hope that helps. Thanks again for listening. Take care.